At night, the enemy fired more than 40 shells at Nikopol. One person was wounded. This was announced in Telegram by the head of the Dnipropetrovsk OVA Valentin Reznichenko. They fired from Gradov and heavy artillery at two masses, Nikopol and Marganets. The hottest thing was in Nikopol. More than 40 Russian shells flew there. A 47-year-old man was wounded, he wrote. Several fires started as a result of the shelling. The firemen have already tamed them. Almost 30 high-rise and private houses, an industrial enterprise, cars, several gas pipelines and power lines were mutilated in the city. More than 1,500 families were left without electricity. Power engineers are already repairing the networks. There were no casualties in the village of Marganets. In other areas, the siren worked, but there was no shelling and at the moment it was calm. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that 11 people were killed and another 15 were injured as a result of shooting, which was opened by two citizens of one of the CIS countries at a training ground in the Belgorod region. It is reported by Ukrinform with reference to Interfax. On October 15, at the training ground of the Western Military District in the Belgorod region, two citizens of one of the CIS countries committed a terrorist act. Two terrorists were killed by return fire, the Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement. Statement. The circumstances of the incident are described as follows. In the course of fire training with persons who voluntarily expressed a desire to participate in a special military operation, the terrorists opened fire from small arms on the personnel of the unit. Law enforcement agencies are on the scene. Earlier in the Russian press it was reported that the shooting took place at a training ground in the village of Solody. There is a camp there, in which, in particular, there are more than 100 mobilized from the Bryansk region who refuse to go to fight in Ukraine. It is alleged that the shooting took place around 10 a.m., but this became known only in the evening. The victims were taken to the Valuisky Central District Hospital. At least two of them received gunshot wounds to the legs, and another victim was wounded in the chest. An unnamed source claims that 22 people were killed and 16 injured in the shooting. In addition, according to him, there were 3 attackers. One of them managed to escape. It is alleged that the source of the publication at the time of the incident was at the site. Recall that on September 21, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on mobilization. The authorities call it partial. It is stated that up to 300,000 people with the status of a reservist will be sent to the army. However, the size of the alleged conscription is not disclosed in the open part of the decree. For the Russian occupiers in winter, the conditions will be more difficult than for the advancing armed forces of Ukraine. Commander of the U.S. Ground Forces in Europe in 2014 to 2018, retired General Ben Hodges, said this on the air of the Espresso TV channel, Ukrinform reports. I am sure that the Ukrainian General Staff will continue to put pressure on the Russian troops and will not give them the opportunity to get on their feet, regroup or learn something. It is very important. In winter, it will be more difficult on the battlefield. The Ukrainian troops have their people behind them, and the Russians, under-equipped, unprepared and untrained, will be forced to withstand heavy attacks from the Ukrainian army, Hodges said. According to the military expert, the Ukrainian forces will continue to advance and will gain momentum, but a little slower and harder. Weather can cause difficulties for drones. But everyone will be in the same weather conditions, but the Ukrainian army will be more prepared and more efficient on the eve of winter, Hodges said. As Ukrinform reported, Ben Hodges believes that the use of tactical nuclear weapons by Russia in the war against Ukraine will only lead to a significant complication of the situation in which the Russian Federation finds itself and will lead to a harsh reaction from the United States. Since the beginning of the full-scale military invasion of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, 40,233 crimes of aggression and war crimes and 17,780 crimes against the national security of Ukraine have been registered. According to an Ukrinform correspondent, the Prosecutor General's office announced this on Telegram. According to the General Prosecutor's office, among the 40,233 registered crimes of aggression and war crimes since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation against Ukraine are violation of the laws and customs of war, planning, preparation or initiation and waging of an aggressive war, military propaganda, etc. At the same time, 17,780 crimes against the national security of Ukraine were recorded, encroachment on the territorial integrity and inviolability of Ukraine, collaborationism, aiding the aggressor state, sabotage, etc. The department notes that 626 representatives of the military political leadership of the Russian Federation, ministers, deputies, military command, officials, heads of law enforcement agencies, warmongers and Kremlin propagandists, are suspected in the main cases of aggression against Ukraine. Also, as a result of Russia's armed aggression in Ukraine, 423 children were killed and 810 were injured. As Ukrinform reported, on the afternoon of October 14, the invaders fired 5 rockets at Kharkiv from the territory of the Russian Federation. The situation in the South Buz direction is stably difficult, but is under the control of the defense forces. This was reported by the Operational Command South on Facebook, Ukrinform reports. The enemy is conducting defensive operations, trying to hold the occupied lines. During the day of hostilities, he inflicted fire damage from rocket weapons, aircraft, multiple rocket launchers, cannon artillery, mortars, tanks on the line of combat. Mining of the area was carried out in the areas of possible advancement of our troops, the message says. The invaders continued to conduct continuous aerial reconnaissance using unmanned aerial vehicles. 2 Orlan-10 of the enemy were destroyed while trying to reconnoiter the successes of the defense forces on the right bank of the Dnieper. In addition, the enemy attacked the Mykolaiv region from the Bastion coastal missile system with 1 Onyx-type cruise missile from the temporarily occupied Crimea. Lossless. The aggressors also continued shelling the port infrastructure and the Ochakov water area with a 120 caliber mortar. Losses are not recorded. By evening, the enemy tried to advance a sabotage and reconnaissance group of up to 7 people in the direction of the liberated Trifonovka. In a shooting battle, having suffered losses, he retreated. The enemy sent 3 attack helicopters and a couple of attack aircraft to Ukrainian positions 4 times. Ukrainian aviation inflicted 13 defeats on enemy positions, in particular, at the air defense deployment sites in the Berislav and Kharkov regions and at the concentration of enemy manpower and equipment in the Nikopol and Bashtan regions. Rocket and artillery units completed 426 fire missions over the past day. Confirmed losses of the enemy: 14 Rashists, 3 self-propelled gun mounts, an MSTB howitzer, an electronic warfare station. In addition, 8 pieces of enemy equipment were damaged, including 2 more self-propelled guns and a 122 caliber howitzer, a tank and armored vehicles. As Ukrinform reported, units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces repelled attacks by Russian troops in the Novosadovo districts in the Kramatorsk direction, Yakovlivka, Berestovo, Bakhmut, Bakhmutsky and Poprosna in the Bakhmut direction, as well as Krasnohorovka, Nevelskoy, Pervomayskoy, Mariinka and Pavdi in the Avdiivka direction. In the Black Sea, 12 Russian warships are on combat duty, including 3 launch vehicles with 12 caliber missiles. The Operational Command South reported this on Facebook, Ukrinform reports. In the Black Sea, 12 warships are maneuvering in a specially designated missile-safe zone. 3 launch vehicles equipped with 12 caliber missiles are in readiness for a missile attack, the report says. As Ukrinform reported, the German Iris-T complex is already operating in the armed forces in the southern direction. From February 24 to October 15, the armed forces of Ukraine eliminated about 64,700 Russian aggressors, which is 400 more than the day before. Russia's efforts to shell the Ukrainian civilian population and mobilize hundreds of thousands of reservists marked a marked escalation in the war unleashed by Putin, but this has not changed and will not change the dynamics of the growing successes of the Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield. Such assessments by Western intelligence officials and military experts were published on Saturday by the influential American publication The Washington Post, Ukrinform reports. By themselves, the missile strikes did not create significant strategic value, although they caused widespread human suffering and undermined the stability of life in cities relatively unaffected by hostilities, the assessment said. As a result of the strikes, apparently aimed at energy infrastructure facilities, residential areas of individual cities plunged into darkness and created additional threats to the civilian part of the population before the winter cold. However, the picture on the battlefield is characterized by the success of the armed forces of Ukraine, which are more maneuverable and purposeful, as well as better armed compared to the bulky, poorly equipped and depleted Russian army. And this trend can be traced at least for the foreseeable future. I expect that Ukraine will continue to do everything possible in winter to regain territory and be effective on the battlefield, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a recent speech in Brussels. At the same time, the head of the Pentagon stressed that the armed forces of Ukraine are demonstrating combat effectiveness and success both in the east and in the south. According to military experts, the winter period can reduce the dynamics of events on the battlefield, but at the same time, Ukrainians will retain the initiative and momentum. However, now it is no longer necessary to count on the fact that the Russian Federation will be able to capture new territories. Ukraine has turned the tide of hostilities so dramatically that the only uncertainty is how much more territory the Ukrainian armed forces can retake, not whether Russia can achieve its goals, said Rob Lee, an expert at the Institute for Foreign Policy Studies in Philadelphia. He stressed that the Ukrainian army is now significantly superior to the Russian one in terms of weapons, equipment, etc., compared to the period at the beginning of the war. Meanwhile, Russia continues to suffer heavy losses, and Ukraine is steadily receiving new and technological weapons from its Western allies. As Ukrinform reported, according to the latest data from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, due to poor quality medical care and the refusal of the command to evacuate seriously wounded servicemen of the Russian Federation to Russia, the death rate among Russians exceeds 50%. Over the past 24 hours, units of the Defense Forces of Ukraine repelled enemy attacks in the areas of the settlements of Torskoy and Spurno in the Kramatorsk direction, Berestovo, Soldar and Bakhmut in the Bakhmut direction, and Mariinka, Pobeda and Nevelskoy in the Avdiivsk direction. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine announced this on Facebook, Ukrinform reports. The enemy is trying to hold on to the temporarily occupied territories, is concentrating his efforts on attempts to contain the actions of the defense forces in certain directions, and at the same time is trying to conduct offensive operations in the Bakhmut and Avdiivsky directions. The enemy fires at the positions of our troops on the entire front, provides engineering equipment for positions and defense lines in certain directions, and conducts aerial reconnaissance. Violation of the norms of international humanitarian law, laws and customs of warfare, strikes against critical facilities and residential buildings. Over the past day, the enemy launched 5 missile and 23 airstrikes, carried out up to 60 attacks from multiple launch rocket systems. Objects and the civilian population in areas of more than 30 settlements were subjected to enemy strikes. In particular, these are Nikopol and Shakhtarsk, Dnipropetrovsk region, Glushkovka, Kharkov region, Orkhov and Mali Sherbaki, Zaporozhye region, Dmitrovka, Kiev, Belogorka in the Kherson region and Volodar in the Donetsk region. In the Volyn and Polisia directions, the situation remains unchanged. The threat of missile and air strikes, as well as the use of Shahid-136 strike UAVs from the territory of the Republic of Belarus, remains. In other directions, the enemy fired at. In the Seversk direction, from artillery of various types, in the areas of the settlements of Nikolaevka, Chernihiv region and Pokrovka, Sumy region. Used and impact UAVs. In the Slobozansky direction, from tanks, mortars, cannon and rocket artillery, in the area of the settlements of Strelka, Odrevets, Staritsa, Gadish, Peskino, Kamenka and Dvireknia. In the direction of Kramatorsk, from tanks and artillery of various calibers along the entire line of collision. In particular, in the areas of the settlements of Belogorovka, Volshebnoy, Malaya Tokmachka, Novoyegorovka, Razdalevka and Serebryanka. In the Bakhmut and Avdiivka directions, the enemy fired from tanks, mortars, cannon and rocket artillery on the line of collision. On the Novopavlovsk and Zaporozhye directions, the enemy fired on more than 15 settlements. Among them are Ugledar, Vermovka, Praskavivka, Prechestovka and Sherbaki. In the South Buz direction, more than 25 settlements along the collision line were affected by fire. Violation of the norms of international humanitarian law, laws and customs of warfare in the temporarily occupied territories has become the norm for the Russian occupation forces. In the village of Rubeznoy, Lugansk region, servicemen from the Chechen Republic, who arrived to reinforce the group, began to evict civilians from private premises to accommodate their officers. According to updated information, the results of the enemy's fire damage were confirmed. As a result of pinpoint artillery strikes by the defense forces in the village of Nikopol, Zaporozhye region, an ammunition depot was destroyed and more than 20 invaders were wounded. In the settlement of Tokmak, 10 units of military equipment were destroyed and up to 40 servicemen were wounded. In the village of Polozhi, up to 30 wounded invaders. In Kamenets-Dniprovskaya, 7 units of military equipment were destroyed and about 40 enemy servicemen were wounded. The death toll, which the invaders are trying to carefully hide, is being specified. Aviation of the defense forces inflicted 32 strikes over the past day. The defeat of 24 areas of concentration of weapons and military equipment, as well as 8 positions of enemy anti-aircraft missile systems was confirmed. In addition, our air defense units shot down 6 UAVs and 1 enemy helicopter in different directions. Over the past 24 hours, rocket troops and artillery attacked 3 areas of concentration of manpower, weapons and military equipment, 1 ammunition depot, 7 enemy air defense facilities and other military facilities.